Forestry doesn't just take trees. Clear-cutting, roads, plantations, and repeated disturbance change how land functions. Clear cuts remove canopy cover. Roads compact soil. Plantations simplify forest structure. Together, they alter how snow melts, how rain moves, and how much water the ground can hold. The forests that nature gives us don't just respond to weather, they help shape it. Dense, intact canopies shade the ground, reduce wind, and keep moisture in both the soil and the air. Through transpiration, forests recycle water back into the atmosphere. That helps maintain local humidity and cooler conditions. When that canopy is stripped away, the land dries out faster, temperatures rise, and fuels become more flammable. That's why intact forests tend to burn less intensely than logged landscapes. Researchers like Eunice Alila have shown how this kind of industrial disturbance leads to higher peak floods and drier conditions between them. That combination matters. When storms hit, water runs off faster instead of being absorbed. When dry periods come, there's less moisture left in the system. That's how you end up with more destructive floods, longer droughts, and more flammable landscapes. The fire data makes this even clearer. Over the past decade, fires have increased dramatically across most of BC, especially in the southern interior and the northeast. And when you look at where the biggest fires are burning, a clear pattern emerges. Many of the largest fires have burned through clear cuts and young plantations, dense, even-aged stands with fine fuels and logging debris. Salvage logging and thinning often add even more combustible material. Clear cuts dry out the land and allow wind to penetrate deeper into surrounding forest. Research on more than 1,500 wildfires in the western United States found that while weather influences fire behavior, forest management is a major secondary factor. Heavily logged forests tend to burn hotter, and the spread is faster than intact, primary, mature forests. The closed canopies of mature forests create cooler, more humid conditions. Their structure breaks up wind. Their dead wood holds moisture instead of flashing into flame. In other words, logging practices directly affect fire behavior. Forestry doesn't cause every flood or fire, but it pours fuel on the fire, literally and figuratively, making each event worse and more expensive. In 2023 alone, insured wildfire losses in BC were estimated at roughly $720 million, on top of the public costs of emergency response, suppression, and recovery. In 2021 alone, floods, fires, and extreme heat caused more than $10 billion in damage. That's not a bad year. That's a warning. Those aren't side effects. Those are system costs. And despite all of that, the depletion, the damage, the rising public costs, the industry isn't just allowed to continue operating, it's actively propped up with taxpayer money. Taxpayers provide significant subsidies to keep the industry afloat, even as mills struggle, small contractors go down, and forests are depleted. From 2010 to 2019, BC lost $3.65 billion managing public forests, roughly $365 million a year in taxpayer-funded losses. On top of that, BC Hydro gives the forest sector a huge break compared with residential customers, because pulp, paper, and sawmills are charged a flat industrial rate far below what typical consumers pay. The value of this subsidy over a 10-year period is estimated at about $5.1 billion. There are also more targeted subsidies tied to lower value fiber, a provincial credit program, essentially allowing companies to cut additional bonus trees that don't count against their license limits, has channeled more than $37 million in taxpayer dollars directly to wood pellet and pulp mills or their suppliers. Those help underwrite purchases of low-quality logs and fiber. Taken together, these supports mean the industry continues operating not just on market forces, but with major public subsidization, even as the land base that supports it is increasingly strained. There's another part of this system that rarely gets talked about: direct taxpayer subsidies via the Forest Enhancement Society. In 2016, the provincial government created a new entity called the Forest Enhancement Society of BC. It was launched with $85 million in taxpayer money and later topped up with another $150 million for a total of $235 million. The society is funded entirely with public money. Officially, its mandate is to support reforestation and land rehabilitation after wildfires and insect damage. But in practice, a significant portion of its funding has gone directly to private companies, including pellet mills, pulp mills, and logging contractors, to subsidize the cost of hauling low-quality logs and logging debris out of the bush and into industrial facilities. According to analysis by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, at least $37 million in FESBC funding went directly to pellet mills, pulp mills, or companies supplying them with fibre. Some of the largest recipients include Pinnacle Renewable Energy, which received $4.37 million and is now owned by UK-based Drax, Pacific Bioenergy, which received $2.18 million, and pulp mills operated by Mercer, Domtar, and Prince George Pulp and Paper, which together received millions more. The society itself has acknowledged that the wood it subsidizes has less market value than the cost of hauling it, and that grants are used to cover transportation costs so companies can use it anyway. What's left unsaid is that this means taxpayers are directly subsidizing the movement of low-value fiber into mills, propping up an industrial system that no longer makes economic sense of its own, and accelerating the depletion of already stressed forest landscapes. And if that's not uncomfortable enough, the government is not meaningfully adjusting this system. There's a massive gap between what government says it values, healthy ecosystems, resilient communities, public safety, and what the forestry laws actually require. Reports get commissioned, public concern gets acknowledged rhetorically, but the legislative structure stays intact. Logging continues under the same assumptions. The same incentives stay in place, and the system keeps producing the same outcomes. That's not a failure of implementation. It's a failure of design. At this point, there are only two options: keep forcing a broken system to limp along, or redesign it. The new Forest Act framework we're proposing is not a tweak. It's not a side policy or another strategy document to be praised and then ignored. It's a full replacement of BC's forestry framework, because the existing system can no longer produce stable forests, stable jobs, or stable communities. It was developed by rural residents, foresters, and retired government staff, not by corporate lawyers. At its core, the new Forest Act, NFA, rests on three pillars: ecological integrity, community-based decision-making, and community economies. These are the organizing principles of the entire system. The NFA shifts BC away from volume-driven industrial logging and toward nature-directed stewardship, treating forests as what they actually are: critical public infrastructure. Infrastructure for clean water, flood and fire protection, biodiversity, long-term timber supply, and community stability. The NFA restructures forestry so local workers, contractors, and communities are the primary beneficiaries, not large, centralized tenure holders.